Terrific. So I neglected to mention my pronouns. They are she and singular they. So I'll make a point to try to save that in the chat when I'm not busy presenting. So Monday is a great day to talk about assessment. And I want to take the temperature of the room. So I'm going to do a quick little poll here. Let me find it. Here we go. So please vote on how you feel about assessment. Your choices are: I'd rather poke my eyes out, I welcome the opportunity to tell our story, it's all a big joke and a waste of time, and it's a necessary evil. Now I realize that on any given day, all of these may apply to you, or you may feel some of them, but we'll take the temp here. All right, I'm going to end the polling. Looks like most of you have voted. And let me just share the results. So it looks like the responses are mostly favorable, that a lot of you welcome the opportunity to tell your story. And then the other half feels that, or slightly less than half, feels that it's just a necessary evil that we have to do. Okay, thank you for sharing that. And we'll see if we can't move some of you from necessary evil over to the welcome to tell your story, or you welcome the opportunity to tell your story. And I want to invite you all to be inquisitive. Think about what it is in your center that you want to know about. And if you can start your inquiry there as looking for answers to questions that you have, it might be a little less onerous of a project. So now if you would just type in the chat for me, and I'll try to keep track. Just type what your values are. What do you want to know about your center, or what do you want to investigate? This is a little free write exercise in the chat, please. So what do you value in your center is one question, and the other is what do you want to find out more about in your center? I'm not seeing much pop in the chat. There we go. I see self-efficacy, process, welcome for our students and students of different populations and different demographics, equity, engagement, safety, supportive, good. Okay, excellent service, so many things. The effect of required visits. Okay, so this is a good start. If you know what it is that you value, then you can apply that and try to figure out what assessments can I use that are going to get at what's important to me. What's important to me and to our center. That's all part of controlling the narrative, that you are investigating what's important to you, and then you can communicate what's important to you and how you're delivering on your goals. Excuse me. So, why do we assess? We assess to communicate the values that you have just jotted down. We want everyone on our campus to know what it is we value. So assessment can be part of telling that story. Other reasons why we assess are to continually improve. I ask questions like, who's doing most of the talking in a tutorial session? It's not that I think there's a particular exact ratio, but I think that makes us reflective, and it tells us something. So that's something I try to assess for continuous improvement. You might ask for continuous improvement, you might look at your scheduler and just see, do I have enough tutors working on Tuesday mornings? That seems to be the highest demand. That may be one feedback loop that you'll use. We also use assessment to argue for our budget, to make sure that we have sufficient tutoring hours and any other needs that we may have. Assessment can help us make those claims. Assessment also, looping back to communicating our values, can increase our visibility on campus. If we're sharing our assessments with our stakeholders, we can help make our centers more visible to everyone on campus. So you'll notice, so we're asking the why, what's our purpose for doing assessments. And I think it depends on what type of assessment we're doing and who's going to look at it. So I've just divided these into an internal and external assessment. It's really this, there's the purpose for external assessment, and we'll talk about audience in a minute. So for internal assessment, like I mentioned earlier, for continuous assessment, we may want to be assessing tutoring practices. Are there tweaks that we need to make in our training so that tutors perform better and that they develop practices that are more in line with what we value? So there may be just an internal feedback loop. We may also want to know if we are serving the whole campus. Are we indeed reaching all departments? Are there ways that might have impact on our publicity, our outreach to faculty, if we see that there are dark corners in our campus that we want to reach? We may also have learning outcomes, and we want to see, are students really learning what it is we want them to learn? You all mentioned that you wanted students to feel welcome. You may include in your exit survey a question about the welcome. If that's something that you value, you can ask questions that pertain specifically to that. I mentioned earlier, you may do some internal assessments just for scheduling. Do you have enough tutoring hours on a given day, at a given time of day, or at a particular time in the semester? External assessments are, again, to be visible externally beyond the Writing Center. We may want to communicate how many visits we have, how many students come to our center, what departments those students represent. If we can have access to such data, we may want to show correlations between Writing Center visits and retention and persistence and student GPA. Talking about the budget thing, we may have to make an argument that there's a good return on investment, and I always use the arguments of the correlations between retention and persistence as here's why we're underfunded, and it doesn't take that many students staying in class to cover my entire budget for a year. Also, our administrators often show our assessments to accreditors, and if we ever get the opportunity to talk to accreditors, sometimes they can be our greatest advocates. So perhaps accreditors can ask for the things that we need in our center. But we also make our institutions look good. And who's our audience? Again, for internal assessments, it may be us. We may need to tweak things in our program as we learn about the schedule or about our tutor practice. We also want our tutors to know, is what they're doing successful, or are they indeed doing the things that they say they're doing or that we think they're doing? And I'm sure Marilee will talk more about that as she talks about how she involves tutors in the assessment. For external assessment, of course, our administrators, those who hold the purse strings, need to know what we're doing and how we're doing. Faculty also, we want to convince them to send their students to us. One thing that I have found out through our appointment forms for our sessions is how students find us. How did they come to the Writing Center? And the vast majority say they found the Writing Center through faculty recommendation or an in-class presentation. So that tells me that I really need to focus on faculty outreach so that students will find us. And accreditors need to know what we're doing and how we're doing and how that conforms and supports our institution's mission and vision. So what is our message? The message is, with all assessment, and that can be quantitative as well as qualitative information, that we do good work, that we know who we are, we know what we do, and we know why we do it. And our assessments are an argument for those things. Another part of our message is that we support the institution's mission, we support student learning, and we support faculty teaching. So in short, we deliver on our values. So I have my report that I will share with you briefly. My annual report goes through, can you all see that? Through the Office of Student Success, where my Writing Center is housed. And that office delivers a whole booklet of assessments, and each department is asked for a 2-page annual report. So here's just a brief overview. I gave the numbers of appointments and the number of students, and of those students, which are graduate students. Targeted student support, here I just talk about the various activities that we're involved in on campus. And then I also give numbers over here on the right of different types of workshops that we give throughout the year, how many students attended those workshops, and from how many departments. Okay, can you see this next page? Did it advance for you? Great, thank you. This year, I also wanted to deliver the message that we were very successful in going online, very successful. We were able to transition quite smoothly. We saw only about half as many students as we would normally, but I wanted campus to know that we were ready and we knew what we were doing and it worked for us. So that was part of my messaging. And I also wanted people to know that we were paying attention to our student outcomes and that despite COVID-19 and going online, we were able to deliver on our learning outcomes. And then I include some testimonials at the bottom. Okay. You know, this was, I see in the chat that you like the visuals. This is from PictoChart. If you want to try it, it has nice templates. And my thinking about reports is administrators especially have about, is it under 5 seconds to look at them? And so I want to give them the numbers that they care about first and foremost in a large font. Okay, I think it's time to move to our breakout session. But I'm happy to answer any questions right now. Yes, Canva is lovely as well. And as Jen mentioned, there are plenty of other options for infographics. Okay. So we're going to send you off into breakout rooms. Here are some resources for you. And in your breakout sessions, I'd like you to discuss with your teammates what you want your campus to know about your center. So just start with what you want to say, what you want to communicate. Welcome back. on your screen, you see a word cloud from what you all typed in the chat about what you value in your center. So I just wanted to give you a visual to help you think about what it is you want to assess in your centers. So students, look how big that is compared to everything else. And learning and self-efficacy, confidence, community. Terrific. Okay, thanks everyone. I'm going to stop sharing and relinquish the floor. You're up, Marilee.
Hi, everybody. Really interesting sitting on the group. Sorry I didn't talk much because I'm very much a talker, so I was trying to not be a talker for a minute and listen more. A challenge for me. So I'm going to talk with you all a little bit about involving consultants in the process of assessment, and many of you were already kind of talking about how that happens in your centers, so that's exciting. So hopefully this will just add on to things you already do as ideas for that. So I'm going to attempt to share my screen. So we'll see. I teach in Zoom, so you'd think I'd be getting used to it, but I am not quite there yet. Let's see. My laptop makes it hard to see everything, so I can move my view. Here we go. Okay. Hopefully that's showing up for all of you. So involving consultants in Writing Center assessment. So I'm going to just throw this lovely quotation up here from a piece by many of our colleagues about the importance of student experience and student voice in Writing Center studies in particular, and how students are a big part of our community. So in my center, it's mostly peer consultants, so that's undergraduate and graduate students who are our consultants. So they make and remake the center every day, and I think nothing we do makes a whole lot of sense if we exclude them from the process. So that was a big motivation for me in including them in our assessment practices, because they're not just recipients of knowledge, they are knowledge makers, and they can contribute in really important ways to how we think about and address how we do what we do. And in assessment, I really liked Shireen's way of phrasing, we talk about how we deliver on our values. And so how can the students who work with us think about those values and help us study that and what we do in our daily practices. So these small everyday things that we do all the time, how can we assess some of those? So in my center, we do this through a committee structure. So one of the committees listed here is research and assessment. So I'll talk most about that, but I want to mention that all students who work at the center are involved in one of these committees. And it's about 10 to 20% of their hours are spent on a committee with a specific job, and each committee has a coordinator that helps delegate the work and supports students doing that work. And of course, I am also connecting a lot with the coordinator, but also with other members of the group, depending on the projects that they have. And I'll say too, at my institution, I have a one course release to direct the center every semester, so it's pretty limited. I, of course, spend way more than that doing it, but we do have an assistant director who's amazing, who does a lot of this work as well. So, so now to talk a little bit more about the Research and Assessment Committee in particular, their job is to work on our assessment practices, support and record research, and attend to institutional history of our center. So I'm going to focus on the assessment today, but you can see there's more here and these things are overlapping. So when I was a grad student at Michigan State University, Trixie Smith and a committee there that I was on developed a similar assessment approach, and I've brought it into the centers I've directed since then. But of course it's different because they're different centers and we have different resources. We have different time. We have different administrative appointments in my case. And so that's going to have an impact, as well as what you need, right? What kinds of resources do you need? What kinds of arguments are you trying to make with the data that you find and have? So with those things in mind, we still wanted to get a general sense of how things operate in our center. And do we do what we say we do? That's pretty much how I see assessment. Do we do what we say? How are we doing it? How are we delivering those things? And so you can't assess everything all the time, but we are trying to get a good sense of our approach. So this is really focused on us and our practices, and not so much on the impact on student writers. That's a lot trickier. And I really admire folks who do a lot of that work, but that's not really what we spend most of our time on. So most of our time is on, do we use the type of pedagogy that's taught in the course, and is what's the word continue to be built upon in our professional development opportunities in our staff meetings, and those kinds of interactions, are those coming through in what we actually do in sessions. So that's what we think about when we talk about observations of sessions. Are we enacting a writing center approach, a writing center pedagogy that we feel good about, that's student centered, that's asset driven, that is really making space for the writer primarily? And so to do our observations, the folks on the Research and Assessment Committee do most of these, although we're hoping to train more people to do them so the staff can observe one another. And we have a form that is not a static document. It's something that we revise every couple of years that we use to say what's happening in our sessions. And we don't like to think of it as a linear, like first you do this and then you do that, but more, are these types of things happening? Although of course there are spaces for like greeting the writer and like closing the session. And so that is something that is a big part of what we do, and we do those across the entire year. Then you're all probably pretty familiar with the client survey. Most of us probably have one. We use WCA Online, so there's a survey option built in, and we ask writers to complete this at the end of a session. And this is something where we look at the questions every semester at the end of the semester to decide, are these questions still serving us? Is this the kind of thing we want to know? So for instance, when we were still in the physical space that I'm pretending to be in today, this is, a background you can tell because I shimmer. I had a lot of questions about the space and how loud it was. So the space that I'm in right now is known to be loud, like it amplifies sound. And so I asked questions about that in the survey, whereas our library space is much quieter. And so I'd ask people which location they were in and their experience with that. And that was part of what we decided to assess. Now we're all online and we're in Zoom. So we have different questions that are more focused on finding their way to their session in any sort of ways that the technology aided or hindered their session. So those client surveys, again, change depending on various affordances at your center. And then our next assessment instrument is a consultant self-assessment. And that is a survey that consultants take once a year. We usually have it around the end of the fall semester. And really, this is a place for them to tell us their comfort levels with various things and to kind of fess up if they're doing things that they shouldn't, like showing up late frequently, and maybe it is not on everybody's radar yet. How they're caring for the space. Again, that's going to be different this year than usual. How comfortable they feel working with graduate students, how comfortable they feel working with multilingual writers, and so on. Those kinds of things go into the assessment. How they feel like they're contributing to their committees, how they feel the center itself is supporting them and their professional goals. How linked are those things for them? So they fill that out. When, again, we're in person, I buy pizza and trick them all into filling out this boring survey while they eat pizza in a computer lab. So this year, I can't do that. So I'm not really sure. I'll have to send a lot of reminder emails, I think is what's going to happen. And then at the end of the year, so usually in April, we do administrative focus groups. And that's where the Research and Assessment Committee has a script. And again, they can go a little bit off script, but it's more of a guiding document to ask questions about how consultants feel supported by their committee coordinators, who also act as shift leaders, how they feel supported by me and our assistant director, and then kind of general questions about the atmosphere and environment of the Writing Center, things that are working well for them as employees, things that are not working so well for them. And so that is conducted by members of the assessment committee. So I do not know who said what. So they write a report and that goes to me. So together, these all inform our practice of how we're doing what we do, and we can look for patterns and make changes as necessary to our course, to our staff meeting content, to our online presence. Like we use Canvas a lot lately for modules for folks to do. So if those are working for us or not. and so on. So it's very informative. It is a lot, and there are years we're better at this than others. You know, there's years where we don't do as much analysis as we should of some of the data that we get. So we might focus more on certain things than others, depending on the resources we have, the time being an important one too. But I also see this as a really important way for consultants to see what assessment is and to understand it as a type of research, and to show them that we are committed to paying attention to how we do what we do. So it doesn't matter what our values are if we don't enact them. An assessment helps us see if that's what we're really doing. So now all right, I guess I might have another slide or two here, but really I'm talking about the committees a little bit more. So the coordinator role is really important here. So you want an experienced consultant to be supporting one another, to support especially the members of their committee, and have a good sense of what's happening in the committee and what needs to get done so that they can lead. This can be tricky sometimes. And they're also on our general shift, they're acting as shift leaders. So they're just known to be people who typically have answers on staff. The committees meet every other week after our staff meetings. And then I'm available to sit in on meetings occasionally. So I sit in on this one a lot because research and assessment is something that's really important to me. And I kind of handle more of the scholarship side of things in the center in general. So that is something where that's a time to talk. I also meet frequently with coordinators in one-to-one meetings, but there's a bi-weekly leadership team meeting that involve all the coordinators and me and the assistant director as well. And so that's really it. I'll stop sharing my screen now. In terms of what I had prepared today, but I could go on at length if there's any general questions before we move into the breakout. Okay, that's good. No questions. Or maybe it's not, I don't know.
Sorry.
Oh, you're okay.
Sorry. Can I ask? Because, okay. Just one question about you mentioned that you observe some sessions. What kind of, or what are the aspects that you observe during a session?
Well, the whole session is observed, and there are, I think, 4 or 5 sections that we kind of attend to in the observation. We don't like to think about it as linear, though, so it's like something you kind of go across. So, but the first and last are very linear in that, you know, did you greet the writer, and how did you greet them? Did you set an agenda? And that's something that happens throughout, right? Like you might set one initially, but then there's like, oh, this is taking longer than I thought, or you seem to want more support with this than we initially thought, or I'm realizing as we read it aloud that there are other things that maybe you'd like to talk about. So kind of checking in and addressing that and having that working agenda. What kinds of support are given? So is it a lot of open-ended questions, a lot of making space for the writer to share their perspective, share their experiences? Are there resources shared? So, you know, links to the Purdue OWL, those types of things, right? Handouts, we don't tend to fixate too much on those, but strategies for things to do, things to try out. So maybe addressing something and then saying, I'm gonna go grab a drink of water, why don't you try that out? And then let that writer try it out and then come back. Like what kinds of strategies are being used to support the writer? How directive are they? How, you know, how are those operating in line with the values that we've set forward? And then wrapping up the session, kind of doing an overview. Here's what we had a chance to talk about today. Are there any other concerns? Giving them a chance to reflect about that and reflect on what they think they're going to do next. Like, oh, okay, when I revise, I'm going to do this. We actually have them write that down, and it goes on the CRF, the client report form. And then, you know, asking them to fill out our survey and like letting them know now could be a good time to set up their next appointment if that's something they're interested in. So that's very long-winded, but generally those types of things are looked at in the observation.
Okay, just one more. And do you have a kind of template or something that you can share or a reference so I can consult it, please?
Well, you know, Trixie and I are working on an article about this. So be happy to get that out to you all as soon as we can. I will say, and I think Shireen mentioned this on one of her slides, this book is really useful. Oh, you can't see it because I'm in virtual land. It's the Building Writing Center Assessments That Matter by Ellen Schendel and William McCauley Jr. I think that's a good starting place.
Okay. Could you write just please the reference on the chat, please? Thank you
Sure.
very much. Okay, thank you very much.
Of course.
I can copy mine from my slide and put it in if that's easier.
Oh, okay.
Okay, thank
Doreen's
you.
will be fuller. Mine's just the title.
That book is the book I mentioned to Breakout Room 5. That book is because one of the things we Marilee, I don't know if this happened with you in your breakout room. One of the things we talked about was like I was using language and I was like, wait a minute, do y'all know what I'm talking about, right? Because then we were like, oh, we're so different backgrounds, and so that kind of gave me something like a vocabulary to use in doing this work. Like
yeah, and these things are also really important with the consultants, right? You need a shared assessment vocabulary with them. So that's part of the early stage of being on the committee. It's like reading, we have these things we call resource guides that are just annotated bibliographies. So we say, okay, like everyone read these 3, but then you can kind of read more broadly, depending on the projects you have or your interest levels. So yeah.
I'll look it up, but Mark Hall has an article about shared values and observations as well. I'll try to find it and drop it in the chat.
Yeah, in his book, Around the Text.
Around the Text.
I'm like, I have it over here.
Oh, it's in that book.
Center work. That one has a lot of really great information about observations.
Yeah, that's it. It's in that book. I'll just put that in here.
Yeah. And I see there's a question from Sheila about aligning the shift leaders and the tutoring schedule. Well, anyone who's a committee coordinator has to work 15 hours or more at the center, so that helps us align structure. We do sometimes have to have someone who is not a coordinator act as shift leader. So ideally that person is more experienced. So not a first or second semester consultant typically, although we do have consultants who have management experience in other parts of their lives. So, you know, it's really individually focused, but that's a great question. And it can be tricky to differentiate between the kind of shift leader role, which is more on the ground management, and the coordinator role, which is really project focused and like mentoring around, you know, research and other kinds of projects. So these are all great questions, and I'm really excited to hear what you guys all talk about in your groups or even join you in one of them. So in your groups, I guess I want you to think about what ways do you already involve consultants, and what ways might you want to, and what kinds of questions, what do you see consultants being best positioned to assess? What kinds of things can they be most helpful with?
And I both went to the same, one of the first articles, which is Neil Lerner's Counting Beans and Making Beans Count. So I think a lot of times we spend a lot of people pay attention to that making beans count, but you also want to pay attention to the beans themselves, right? Which is sort of that just really not so sexy, who came in, when they came in, but there's a reason why this becomes important. And a lot of you probably know this. We spend an awful lot of time justifying our existence, right? To the university, and not only in terms of why they want us, but like explaining to them that we're more than just remediation, right? That the actual really super good learning happens in this place. And so I think it's interesting that this particular article was written in 1997. He had a couple of follow-ups with it too, but it's a good one to go look at. And I think this quote is super important because our institutional survival really is dependent on these simple, straightforward numbers, and it becomes important that you can articulate those to the administrators in the language to which they speak, right? Because if they can't understand you, then it doesn't do you any good. So let's talk a little bit about what annual reports are, right? So they are sort of this 40,000 foot view of your year. You're going to use plain language. You're not, one of the mistakes that I often make is I talk to writing center people in my annual report, and that is not who I'm talking to, right? They don't really want to geek out about zonal proximal development. They don't care. And so, but it's also something that you can spread out and help with other audiences. It's a wider audience than sometimes the assessment report that either that your university, your institution has assigned you that you must use, which is really painful to write. Or even like if you're moving towards scholarship and you're doing assessment, you're like, oh, this might be an interesting article or something. So this is a pretty super wide audience. What they aren't is they aren't really assessment yet, because they're not going to tell you if they're not always going to tell you, and they're not meant to say you're doing it well, right? First, you're just naming what we know. Thank you, Liz Wordle, right? You're just saying, this is what this is that we're doing. And then it does sort of help you start to steer strategically in conjunction with your sort of more meaty assessment. And then it's meant to be exhaustive in this sort of top way. Like, these are the things we did. And you saw in Shireen's, we did these kinds of workshops, and this is who came, and this is our users and all that kind of thing. So I want to tell you why they're awesome. First of all, they really create good transparency, right? So a lot of times and I don't know if any of you guys have this, I find that my older faculty don't always love us. They don't always really understand what we're doing. And so if I talk to them about it, or if I share out with a wider audience what it is we're doing and how we're doing it, so either with athletics or with my provost office, it just looks like I'm super above board. And that, that's just an issue of ethos, right? Like, I'm just building our ethos as a writing center, that you can trust us that we're doing this kind of good work. It tell part of the story, right? So in your annual reports, and I'm going to show you mine in a second, because I think that just is so much more meaningful, but you can give a little context, you can give a little history for the year, you can talk about who was involved in this. It's instant data. What I love about, and I'm very, I'm not, those folks on here that know me know that I am usually sort of fly by the seat of my pants kind of gal, but this, I am very strategic. Every year I make sure and I block out 3 days that I get this done, because what's going to happen is, in about a month and a half, I'm going to start getting emails, because we're working on SACS review. When the October numbers come in for enrollment, they're going to want to start looking at retention, and everybody starts to panic. That's when they start putting together assessment reports for the previous year. If I've already done this, and my associate dean calls and asks me a question, and I can answer her in 5 minutes, y'all, it makes this look so good. So having that instant data that you've already dealt with and sort of put in a manageable genre that can help you articulate what you did, and then help her, in my case, her articulate. It makes you look good. More importantly, it makes your supervisor look good. I mean, never underestimate what that does for you in terms of lobbying for resources, because, and then same for your supervisor, right? When they can answer those questions really quickly, it gives you a way to brag on the work you did, right? I love bragging on my tutors. I love bragging on the great things that they did. So we do that in some ways, like, through, like, we'll put something in our communication that goes out, or we'll put it on our Instagram page and stuff. But this really, formalizes it. And so had an article that was published in Dangling Modifier or whatever. It gives you opportunities for defending. So unlike Shireen, we went from an absolutely beautifully full schedule with COVID to nothing. I mean, we literally went from about 60% center usage, which is good, right? You never want to be at 100, because then people can't get in, to maybe 5%. Like, it just dried up so fast. And it's partly has to do with just who we are as a campus, and the fact that so much of what we do is face-to-face, and it's just hard for students. It was hard for faculty. That switched this past year. So I was able to build that into my annual report and say, look, we still, much to what Shireen said, we still offered, we still rallied and put around protocols and put in policies for what online tutoring would look like. We were up and running again within 48 hours, all that stuff. So even though our numbers don't show that we got used, we were ready. And then it also becomes a marketing tool, right? It becomes a marketing tool for admissions. They love to talk, I can send it to my head of my admissions, and they can talk about, this is what they do in the Writing Center. So it becomes super helpful. I'm actually gonna not talk about that slide first, if you'll pardon me. I'm yet to figure out how to toggle sometimes with these things. So I'm gonna pull up my annual report that we use. Can you guys see that? It should say, hold on, let me get to the top, sorry. I'm like Molly, where my laptop is like hiding things. Can you see that? So 2017, shaking of heads a little bit. Kat, can you see that? Okay. Okay, good. All right, so this is funny for Matt. So Matt is actually at University of Central Florida, and this came from the University of Central Florida because I stole it from Mark Hall, who was really helpful, because I called him one day in a panic because I was new to my job. I had been a tutor, but I had never understood how the sausage was made, right? And I didn't know what the expectations of me were. I didn't really understand what assessment was. And they just kind of said, here, swim, little fishy. So I called Mark and I'm like, it's the end of the year and I need to capture some stuff. And so he said, okay, this is what I have. It's basically an executive summary, right? It was interesting that Marilee I think it was Marilee that talked about making sure that your language mirrored like your mission of your university. So I go ahead and put it straight up in here. You can see this is one where our peer tutoring program was part of this assessment. We've now separated those out, but I've also got the mission of the Writing Center. First thing I do is highlights. This is what we did this year. We bumped up to a level 3 for CRLA. I'm going to talk about what CRLA is in a minute if you're not sure what I'm talking about. And then we talked about like, you know, who our appointments were, who came in. We talk about what the staff did. This is one of those places you can brag. At that time, we had a pretty significant Department of Education grant. So we talked about sort of that information. Any of that information that I had to report, I copied it and stuck it in my annual report. So I'm just going to show you a couple of quick things because I'm going to run out of time. One thing, so this is specific to the grant, right? But it still makes our Writing Center look good, or our tutoring center. I'm just doing a year over year. This were the years of the grants, the number of unique high need students, right? And how the visits went up, right? I had to prove that we were doing the kind of marketing and the kind of word of mouth to get students to come in. And then I just pulled straight from their assessment of the grant and threw that into my Writing Center, right? So this won't mean anything to you guys, but when we first started the grant, our high need students, their GPA was below 3.0. And by the end of the grant, not solely because of us, but we had a role in helping them get a higher GPA, which was really exciting. That is boring. I'm not going to show you that one. This came straight out of my institutional effectiveness people. I don't think anybody's talked about that quite yet. Those guys are amazing for helping you get stuff. One of the things I do, I never tie my assessment to grades, but you can't not talk about grades and retention. And we actually have a pretty good history. Most writing centers and tutoring centers have a pretty good history of being a major player in retention. And so email your institutional effectiveness folks and say, hey, these are the people that used our Writing Center. What can you tell me about their grades, right? What can you tell me about their retention? This was an interesting year. This particular year had more to do with, you actually can see us kind of starting to switch places there towards the end, that the kids that were being tutored were starting to have a higher GPA. We were seeing that the kids that were coming in that weren't using tutoring were actually struggling a little bit. So it was interesting to be able to talk about that. It actually helped me be able to build a case for having more time at orientation to sort of talk about our services and what we can do. The other thing I do, and obviously Shireen's was much better, and that is my goal this year, is to switch ours more to an infographic. But I do the same thing here, and I talk about, like, this is who we talked to. And I want them to know, like, what kind of, like, if I don't tell the administrators, this is how much face-to-face time we are doing with people, whether it's virtual or going to the meeting with the men's wrestling team or going to the Greek life and talking to them. I need them to know that how much time this stuff takes. So that's one thing about the infographics that I kind of like the listing a bit, because I need you to see that this took preparation and it took time for us to do it, right? And then to also see the diversity of it. Like, we're talking, some of it is academically based, some of it is athletics, it's going through athletics, some of it's going through Greek stuff. So it just sort of depends. This is where I tell them about the training that the tutors do, and then services, right? Ways that we've sort of served the university. And then lastly, I think I might have like 1 minute left to say this. Oh, I have a couple minutes. Lastly, I'm going to talk a little bit about accreditation. So Shireen talked about accreditation from sort of those out, the larger folks that we have to work with, like SACS and oh gosh, my brain just went on hiatus because I'm in the middle of a SACS review right now. So being in North Carolina, we have to work with the Southern Association of Colleges and show them that we're doing what it is we say we do. But there's also a way that you can actually get accreditation for your own particular program. One is through the College Reading and Learning Association. To be sure, that particular group is not built for writing centers, but they are super flexible. You can actually pull out topics that are specific to subject tutoring, plug in topics that are writing center related, and they don't really care, right? Their entire level 1 is beautifully scaffolded. They would say you can do this kind of exercise, and this is how you can assess it. Like, they will literally hand it to you. It's fantastic. In the Southeast, the SWCA, we also have a specific type of accreditation that has just started. It's the CARES. There's a name, I can't remember what the acronym stands for. I think Joy is on this call, and maybe Joy can speak to this. I think they're maybe thinking that eventually they'll be able to do outside of the Southeastern group too, but they are specifically built for the writing center world. And what's great about these types of accreditations is administration loves it. They love to see that you've gone out there and done things to make you, I'm sorry to use this phrase, but you are doing the best practices of whatever your student support is. Your business school has to go through accreditation, nursing, education, anybody that has a licensure, they're going to be doing these same kind of things. And so I think the administration likes it because it takes a little bit of the onus off of them, if it were. I'm going to stop talking for a second. I talked a lot and really fast as a Southerner.
Jen, can I jump in just a second?
Please, thank you. I knew I saw you. I was like, I think Joy's on here. Maybe she can do it for me.
Yeah, no, thank you so much for mentioning that. So yeah, we actually did get our first out of region accreditation last cycle with BYU. So that was awesome. And like you said, it's something you can do in conjunction with CRLA, and it tries to note the context of the writing center. We've got rotating reviewers who are already been certified. So right now we've got like a Research 1 level reviewer, community college, and sort of a mid-size regional. So we're looking at the centers within the context and also trying to give back by providing resources, which is sort of an ongoing program. You can also apply for center innovation funds if you get certified as well. So thanks for mentioning that.
You're welcome. We're planning on doing that this year, Joyce, so yay. So what I love about annual reports is, and this was coming up in our breakout room, is you can kind of get a sense of where you are in a given year, and that can then help you think about how you want to steer your assessment. In our particular breakout room, and I think I'm done with my time, we had a lot of folks that are brand new to their roles, and not a stitch of paper could be found about what had happened before, what had gone on, what had been done, if any assessment. So one quick thing I'll tell you that can really help fill out your annual report is go to your institutional effectiveness folks and get your NESE information. Like, they will have taken that NESE, NSSE, which is the survey that they do with both first years and seniors, and then the SSI inventory, which is the student satisfaction inventory. And a lot of those big surveys go out to the entire student body. They may or may not have good responses, or a number of responses, but if they do, then you can then look at yourselves in terms of like national numbers, and then numbers within your own sort of type of institution and things like that. Okay. I talk fast for a Southerner. Kate's laughing at me, she knows. Questions, concerns?
For breakout rooms, Jen,
Yeah.
or not yet?
Yeah, no, I think so. I think yes.
Okay.
Can I just ask verbally instead of typing? Okay. So our group, one of the things that we were talking about is how to use assessment to leverage our worth on a particular campus. So I was wondering if any of the presenters have any advice on how we can use assessment, particularly of professional consultants, to help leverage shifts in position, recognition of contribution to the institution in terms of instructional value, faculty FTEs, the weight that writing center directors often carry in terms of direct instruction, both in our individual classes that we are instructor of record and the classes in which we're doing workshops. I think that's one of the things that came out of ours, is how do we show that we are not the same as staff who are maybe working as administrative assistants or athletic directors or something like that, right? So a lot of us have these weird positions in the third space.
So, Kat, I love that question. One thing that a good piece of advice that I got really early on when I first became a director was frame everything as if it's teaching. Oh gosh, I love her. Lauren Fitzgerald taught me never to say tutor training. It is always tutor education, right? This is what we do, right? We spend our days thinking about how words work. And I always frame, and we talked in our breakout group about like sort of my annual report versus the infographic that Shireen used. And I love infographics, and we definitely would like push that kind of thing out on social media and stuff. But I actually want to list out like the labor intensive work. So I actually put on my annual report and my performance review, frankly, like the emotional labor of supporting tutors. Right. And you were also talking about professional tutors. And so that one I cannot speak as well to, but I think however, when you think about what is it the story you want to tell about your center, when you're going back to that assessment thing, I think anytime you can frame it in the lens of scholarship and teaching, that's just different than being an athletic director. It's just,
Yeah, I'd echo that. I'd echo Jen's comments and say a lot of it has to do with the values that you see the institution wanting to be exemplified. And so I'm sure you're already doing this. So showing how you connected those narratives and how you can how you're supporting that and how your role is unique in a really awesome way, as opposed to the woe is me way, which I know is sometimes what we get out of these sorts of interactions, which is also necessary, but more of the, how is this really amazing work? In my own center, it's been about seeing the center as a site of research and a site of professional development for consultants, which are undergraduate and graduate students for the most part, but still I think it's a similar narrative. So like one of the things we did was a peer writing tutor alumni research project. So it's kind of like assessment, very similar kind of work. And that was also, I had undergraduate consultant work with me on that project. So the notion was like, hey, this is research we're doing together, and it's about how this is a professionalizing experience. And we're going to present about it, and we're going to write about it and publish about it. We haven't done that last part, although I'm sending something out like this week. So we'll see. Co-written with the undergraduate student who stayed on as a master's student who just graduated. So those are like long-standing narratives, right, about mentoring and teaching that then tie into this notion of my sense of the center. And I know it's a thing that the School of Arts that supports us is super excited about. So I'm sure we all have those stories, right? So how do we actually do it? Because we're doing it all the time. We're always trying to say, here are these cool things happening. So how can we tap into that and showcase it on a beautiful infographic, on our less beautiful required reporting form or what have you?
I have a question. I'm familiar with some forms of assessment for assessing a space or a community for accessibility, but I was wondering if anybody had any recommendations for assessment for other kinds of access. So thinking about assessing a community for whether it's anti-racist, or assessing a community for whether it's welcoming for multilingual students, for example.
Okay, I'm sorry. I'm talking too much. Uh, Rachel, I think I'm understanding this. So I was just telling the breakout group, I think often too, when we hear assessment, we automatically jump to like quantitative and numbers and all that kind of stuff. And again, the power of our words. Your post-session tickets are beautiful narratives of what happened. And that's exactly the space where I talk about how we try to promote anti-racist practices. And so I think that's a place that you could, is that what you're asking, or am I misunderstanding?
I think more what I'm asking is figuring out student perception.
Oh,
So
okay.
like whether or not it's coming across.
Oh yeah. Okay, then I'll be quiet.
You know, my staff is working on a project on this very thing right now because we've been moving our mission to be more explicitly anti-racist and decolonial, and for like years, but it takes a long time for that to actually be visible. So it's more and more visible internally, but how do we make that visible externally? Through our mission statement, we have a program called Difficult Conversations, which doesn't that sound like fun? Don't you want to come and have a difficult conversation with us? But we actually have a group of undergraduate students who are working on a survey that will go out to student writers about their perceptions of the center. And we want to include questions that are about, you know, climate and welcome. And, you know, using existent Writing Center scholarship and other scholarship in these areas. So like there was that great issue of the peer review a few years back on braver spaces. There was a great one of issue of praxis focused on race in the Writing Center. So things like that to guide our practice. Of course, there's others. Those just two pop to the top of my mind. And so using those things as foundations for thinking about and talking about how do we do this? And I think also letting people know, like we wrote a message out to campus in the wake of George Floyd's murder about like how we are working to be better and how we support Black lives. And it's not perfect. And we didn't, I mean, there were a lot of those statements coming out, right? So it wasn't like, look how great we are, but it was kind of like, we're trying, help us continue to do better. And pointing to stuff that has been happening and like inviting people in to be part of that. So that's different than measuring it, but also thinking about how we're doing that work. But also I feel like Jen right now, I'm talking too much. So
I would just add that you want to keep track of everything that you do. So if you have faculty or tutor training, if you give workshops, if you're asking questions on your survey, even just saying these are some steps that we're taking. You don't always have a number that comes after, but you can say, here are some of the steps we're taking. Then if there is a way to assess them through a focus group, through a survey, the tutor reflections, you know, I mean, they're all challenging, right? It's trying to change a lot of institutional issues and individual blind spots. So maybe I would say starting small with what you show people and show your steps is one way. And it's not that we're going to fix it all this year, but that here's what we're doing now, here's what we hope to do next, and here's what we're learning as we go. Might be one way to approach it.
And watch the social media channels for your school. There's so much happening there that students are, and that's where I found out a lot of good stuff, including the fact that apparently our center wasn't open this year. Who knew? I mean, I'm working, my tutors are working, and yeah. So yeah, Rachel, that would be an interesting place to start too.
Thank you.
Can you talk about the danger of over-assessing and maybe collecting too much data so that it promotes like student fatigue in filling out the surveys and things like that, or when to be strategic?
And this came up in one of the breakout groups. Oh, go ahead. Someone else talking?
That was me.
Oh,
I was just going to say that I think our students are over-surveyed by every entity on campus and not just the Writing Center. We still use WC Online to send them a survey at the end of each session. So if they come see us twice a week, they're going to get 2 surveys a week. And I try to have the tutors talk to them about it and just say, we value your feedback, but we certainly don't expect you to do it every single time. So please give us feedback and do what you can do. But, and we don't, I think we're lucky if we get 10%. And I think that's a pretty common survey ratio. And I just think that's what it is. But one idea is to just survey students at the end of the semester, or to have a 2-week or some small window where you survey everybody, and encourage your tutors to ask students to do it. So maybe just having a shorter window and then determining when the best time for that window is might be one way to get at that.
That's what we do too. Surveys are usually my last choice. Plus, there's just so much evidence that they're not, especially that they skew more towards satisfaction versus what actually happens. Pre-COVID, we use WC Online, but anybody that has a post-session, report. Pre-COVID, the way our sessions ran was it was a 45-minute session with the tutor, and then the last 15 minutes were for the tutor to do the ticket, but they wanted to do it while a student was still there because there was a box in there that said student follow-up, and they literally turned their laptop and the student wrote in what they were going to do next. And that was how we were able to assess, and because we could see like what kind of language were they using, was it actually, because we laughed about this because every session they want to work on grammar and flow, but that's not really what they want to work on. And so we could make the argument of like students don't have a vocabulary to talk about their writing, and so then I could take that to the first year writing director and say, I need you to hit like the rhetorical situation more because folks don't know what they're asking. So that's a way to do it, like within the ticket too.
I would say for ours, we had a huge drop off on surveys. We did paper surveys and we're getting like a 75 to 80% return rate, which was awesome, but they were largely positive. One of the things that we shifted to about 1.5 years ago was doing session narratives instead of just kind of click boxes. All of our data goes through our single sign-on banner, which is nice because we can pull it all according to ID number, know which class, it's all automatically loaded and we can just kind of click it. But we switched over to doing session narratives so that now we can just pull the paragraphs and see what it is that our consultants are saying is happening in a session. We can do some open coding with that to look at the more qualitative outcomes of what our consultants actually observed happening, not just what students reported coming in for, or that Laura's great, give her some candy or a raise, right? Like that's not a helpful comment for me. But having consultants right in there, Jen came in today to work on her flow and her grammar, but we really worked more on the structure of her argument and a thesis. Her next steps are these things.
Yes.
And then we use those for training later, so that we can double dip or triple dip on those pieces of data.
Well, everyone, I just want to say thank you so much for the excellent conversation. I have pages of notes. I can't thank you all enough for sharing your expertise and your time today. We're right at the hour, so I want to be respectful of everyone's time and just say if you still have questions, please reach out with additional questions. You're welcome to contact me. Happy to continue engaging in conversation. And I know many of the presenters are as well. So thank you all again. As a final reminder, the recording of this webinar will be posted to the IWCA website, so look for that in a couple of weeks. And hope you all are well and safe, and look forward to seeing you at the next webinar. Thanks everyone. Thank you presenters.
Thanks. Bye, Molly.